Welcome to another episode of the Soulful Side of Life with me, Ali Portee. I do hope you're well. I hope that you're having a good week. And today's podcast episode is with author and speaker Nelson Schuman. I thought it would be very key to have a discussion with Nelson. This is the second podcast episode with him on the key questions that we should be asking in dating or even before dating, questions we need to ask ourselves as individuals and questions that we need to ask ourselves when we're face to face with the person that we're dating. This discussion is centered around Christian relationships, Christian marriage, but I do believe here that there is something to take away no matter what your spiritual practice is. There's wisdom that's rooted in this discussion, so I would encourage you to stick around. A little bit about Nelson. His work centers on healing, identity, and healthy relationships. So this conversation goes much deeper than the typical Christian dating advice conversation. Rather than focusing on chemistry or compatibility alone, the conversation can help listeners understand discernment, character, emotional health, and spiritual maturity before marriage. The goal of this conversation between Nelson and myself is to move from the heart, healing, practical questions that we should be asking our partners, the red flags, the green flags, and the fact that there's hope in having a healthy, healed relationship. So enjoy this podcast episode with Nelson Schuman. Do be sure to pick up a copy of his book, Healing from Soul Wounds. And I encourage you to really pick up a copy of this book because I was blessed from reading it. And Nelson and his team, they also do Deliverance sessions. So if you feel that's something that would be beneficial to you, I'll put a link in the bio to his site where you can connect with his team on scheduling that. And yeah, be encouraged, be blessed, and enjoy this episode. Hi, I'm Ali Portee, and I'm a fashion and lifestyle journalist and editor of Zayla magazine. I've always been interested in biographies and in the stories of people's lives, basically listening to what stirs their souls. Welcome to the Soulful Side of Life, where I let you in on some of my conversations with inspiring people from around the world in faith, fashion, entertainment, music, entrepreneurship, and so much more. These are conversations that stir the soul about people's journeys, about the ups and downs of life, and how they have overcome situations. I hope these episodes will inspire your life in some way. So enjoy over a cup of something hot or on your drive to work. This is The Soulful Side of Life with Ali Portee. Nelson, thank you so much for joining the podcast again. How are you?
Well, it's great to be here, and I'm doing very well, surviving some of the heat here in Dallas during the summertime.
I can only imagine. It's hot here in South Carolina, but I think Texas is another level.
Yes, we've been here now, my wife and I, for about almost 3 years now, and this year has been especially warm, where there's temperatures typically about 100 degrees every day for the last couple weeks and for the next couple weeks. So it's we're in the oftentimes we get a lot of rain here during May, June, but now here in July we've not had much, so it's getting to be the dog days of summer now.
Yeah, I can imagine you're going to look forward to fall with like a kid in a candy store.
Oh, yeah, we can't wait. Of course, fall doesn't typically come till November, so
You've got
but
some time.
yeah, yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm very happy to chat with you about this topic of the questions that no matter what age you are, if you're thinking about getting married, the questions that couples should be asking themselves individually, but also each other, to discern if they're ready for the commitment of marriage, the covenant of marriage. And it's a very serious thing because, as you know, we know God created marriage and there's holiness to it. And we need to ask certain key questions because maybe somebody isn't right for us. And I think, for myself, there's wisdom in asking the right questions before you're in too deep, before your emotions are in too deep. And that's what I really wanted to chat with you about. So the first thing, the first kind of theme I want to touch on is why this conversation matters. And the first question is, why do you think so many Christians prepare more for the wedding day than they do for the actual marriage?
Yeah. So, why this is obviously so important is there's so many that are, that have gone through the process of being married, and then oftentimes shortly thereafter, sometimes on the honeymoon, sometimes within a month or so, you see a different side of the person that you never saw. And you're like, wait a minute, why is this person treating me this way when they were all sweet and loving and kind, prior to the wedding day? And so many people forget. I mean, they don't teach really this. They talk about, in the church, premarital counseling, but how many talk about premarital soul wound healing and deliverance? Because that is the most important. That is typically lacking in majority of anyone that would tend to go through any type of pre-marriage counseling. And so, yeah, they end up spending all this money and all this time on the one-time event that's going to be lasting a few hours. And then oftentimes, and I've talked to a Christian psychologist that's well respected on this, and he said that he has seen this over and over again, that oftentimes on the honeymoon, within the first week, there'll be a different side of that person that will manifest essentially or come out of that person, a different personality that was never seen prior to the wedding day. And primarily it's because they know at that point, well, I've got you, you've committed, you've done this publicly, so now there's no getting out of it. And yet, yeah, well, and what I've seen in the 11 years I've done ministry is that you will tend to have one of the people that get married that will tend to be more controlling, want their way, more domineering, and then the other person tends to want to just go along with that person. And of course, both parties need to get their soul wounds healed and be delivered from any demonic strongholds, and most aren't. So therefore, you're going to tend to see a lot of marriages where you'll have one that's more Jezebelic, one that's more Ahab or Ahabish, as in First Kings and Second Kings, where Jezebel and Ahab got married. Ahab should not have married Jezebel. He should have come from more of a godly background. Should have said, he should have done some research and found out her background and how her dad was a king and he was very ruthless and they worshipped idols, worshipped Baal and Ashtoreth. And so had he listened to the Lord would have said, all these red flags. No, just because Jezebel might be attractive, might physically look attractive to him, and there's a lot of people in marriages. That's what they do is this person's beautiful or this person's handsome. And they fall in love with the idea that that person's going to always treat them with love and kindness and the fruit of the Spirit. But then invariably in most marriages, in fact, the Lord has told me, and I've kind of seen this play out in my ministry, that about 85% of marriages, you're going to have one that's more dominant, domineering, that wants to get their way on most things, some things that are trivial. And then the other person, if they don't do what they want, then they're going to basically have a lot of lectures and emotional damage from that other person that wants their way. And most people don't want to think that, there's no way this person, I've fallen in love with them, and we've dated for, 6 months or a year. and this person really loves me, and yet there's going to be some red flags that most people kind of want to look uh, away from and not, especially if they get down the road to where they're starting to get to the point where they're planning the wedding and they've got all this money invested and time invested, and of course sending the invitations out. Well, there's no going back now. We got to go through with this. And so yeah, a lot of people, they ignore who that person really is within them, in their spirit, and they want to look on the outside and say, "Well, they're beautiful, they're handsome, they're smart, they're wealthy, they're rich, so therefore I can look and away from and excuse some of the behaviors that might have been the red flags leading up to that."
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I interviewed my cousin in Buffalo who had she's retired family court judge, and I interviewed her on this topic of a godly marriage, and she said something interesting. She said, you know, most marriages, or most who someone mostly chooses, is probably the wrong person for you. And that's probably just her quick talking of, it seems like that's a painting with broad strokes. It seems like that's a very kind of extreme statement to make, that most people who someone chooses is probably the wrong person for you. But it kind of puts in, and that's her experience being in family law, which is a hard part of the law to be in. But seeing all of the brokenness in that field, probably she's just seen some things. So it takes discernment.
yeah. I mean, of course, I would say, understanding what I've understood now that I've taken thousands of people through personal sessions, I've counseled with, you know, thousands of couples and so forth, and seen the hurts, the wounds, the damage, how it affects the children and so forth. It speaks volumes that what is missing and what is lacking in all these marriages that are tragic, really, is that these people have been hurt and wounded prior to getting married, oftentimes from their fathers, from their mothers, from their step parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. 95% of people are either exposed to pornography and or sexually touched or molested by the age of 14. So 95% of people essentially will struggle oftentimes with lust because of that. And they're not healed and they're not delivered. So they come together in a marriage, and if the pastors don't know anything about healing and of the emotional wounds and getting delivered demonic spirits, then they're setting them up for failure, because now there's a whole lot of demonic spirits that are tormenting that person in their soul, which is their mind, their will, their emotions. And they can have the Holy Spirit in their spirit, but they can still have demons that have rights, legal rights to attach their soul, because of unforgiveness from the people that hurt them, because of pride, because of lust, because of all these things that they've been hurt and wounded by, and they've not got those wounds healed. So therefore, they're coming into the marriage thinking everything's going to be great because they call themselves Christians. Again, we're speaking to our audience as being Christians or identifying as a Christian. Uh, but it does not preclude them from still having demonic influences that will cause them to trigger, which means they overreact to oftentimes things that are minor, trivial things, but they overreact. They get really angry if they don't, the classic case is a person, what happens when they don't get their way? How do they treat their spouse? Like if you have a different, decision on something, it could be simple as where we're going to eat at tonight. And you could have the more dominating person that, no, I want my way and I'm going to go here and this is what we're going to do. We're not going to even have a discussion on it. Um, or it could be something even more important, such as, hey, honey, I think we might need to go through this process of getting some soul wounds healed and getting delivered. Oh, no, I'll never do that. I don't need that. I'm a Christian. I'm good to go. And they call themselves a Christian, and they can ask Jesus into their heart. They can read the Bible. They can do all the things esoterically, but yet if they've never taken a look in the mirror at themselves and asked the Lord, do I have anything in me that I need to get freed from and healed from? If they're not real with that, which a lot of people aren't, a lot of those that are more Jezebelic, that would be considered more narcissistic, they're very hard to get healed and get delivered because the demons to convince them that they don't have anything to change. All their problems are their spouse, or all their
Yeah.
problems are people that won't do what they want. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and those strongholds, they are very strong. And oftentimes we don't even see it. One, if you're not even aware that there are these spirits that are controlling you. And a lot of times we're not aware why we act the way we do, why we have, this or that problem. Just being oblivious, that can keep you, from getting the healing. And then surrendering to God, admitting that you've got an issue. I mean, all of this, it's a lot of gunk. And to weed through that, to realize that there's something more. There's for freedom, Christ has set us free, and that it is possible to be free. It's a lot that the devil keeps us unaware of and blind to. It's a lot, but it's
yeah.
possible.
And most Christians, I grew up in the church, but I was always taught that Christians can't have demons. You can't be oppressed by demons. Demons have to leave as soon as you ask Jesus into your heart. Well, then when I finally started noticing people in my life, including myself, that, wait a minute, why am I struggling still with these fleshly things? Why am I not healed of this? Why am I not able to walk in the fruit of the Spirit? I was being honest with myself. There's a lot of people that won't be honest, or they'll hear the voices in their head that largely are coming from demonic spirits, giving them thoughts like, hey, you don't have demons, or you're fine, and all your problems are other people, that if they would just listen to you and do what you say, everything would be fine. So they convince them of lies. But if we can be honest and say, no, I'm struggling because I got hurt when I was a child, or they were exposed to pornography, they were touched, they were molested, they had a father or mother that caused them to feel rejected or not good enough about themselves, or ugly, fat, whatever they might have felt from these people that were in their lives. And if they don't get those wounds healed, then there are demonic spirits that have rights because of those hurts and wounds, because of the unforgiveness, to attach to their soul and then give them lots of thoughts and then cause them to behave in ways with their emotions that would cause them to justify all the behavior that they have that's not good or not godly. And
Yeah.
that's the problem, is that the church has contributed to the issues. And that's why, we're seeing more people than ever reaching out to our ministry saying, hey, I need help. I can't get help from my church. My pastor doesn't know anything about deliverance. I know I need it. And I know
Mm.
and I know my spouse needs it. So we're helping the marriages of those who both want to be healed and delivered. Of course, it's a free will thing. And there's a
Yeah.
lot that are those that are more Jezebelic, narcissistic, are more resistant to admitting the truth that they need to get healed and delivered. But I know
Yeah.
when I first started out doing this ministry, I focused on mainly those that were pretty strongly affected by a lot of significant hurts and wounds. And I figured that, okay, only the people that have gotten really bad hurts and wounds need to go through deliverance. And then eventually I learned, nope, we all do. We've all been
Mhm.
hurt. Some, of course, way worse than others. But if we don't go through that, then we come into a marriage and we get married. And then oftentimes what will happen is we will trigger on one another and say things that are hurtful and wounding. And we end up really damaging each other and damaging the marriage. And if we have children, we end up causing the children to feel completely insecure. And then we end up hurts and wounds on the children as well. And so the saying of hurting people hurt people, yeah, it's because they're not healed and they're not delivered. And those who are healed can help people. And that's why they need to pursue. And again, it's a process. Nobody gets healed completely, delivered of everything within a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour type session, but they can get a lot of stuff broken off. And then they have to just continue to pursue it, listen to the Lord for themselves. So,
Indeed. I'm want to be careful. I've got a lot of questions here, but there's not possible to get through all of them. What's the biggest misconception Christians have about finding the one?
yeah. Um, I would say that, a lot of people would consider the one being potentially the most attractive person that they can find that would agree to date them or whatever. And so they base it upon that attractiveness, but also can be based on money and finances. And that's the one because they got the most money. And in reality, a lot of times both of those people can be uh, very hurt, wounded, and broken and selfish. And then they end up getting to the point where they say, I do. And then all of a sudden that starts to come out of the person. And they're like, wow, I didn't want to admit or think that I saw that in the person when I was dating. And then after the marriage, that's all I see is that I got to give in and do whatever they want. And then and it can be a woman that's under that influence, of course, of Jezebel. It can be a man that has the spirit of Jezebel as well. But typically, that is a misconception, is that or people think that, well, they said they were a Christian and I saw them reading their Bible once and they go to church. So I thought, well, everybody's the same. They're all godly people. They all have the fruit of the Spirit if they check the boxes for that, and that's not the truth. There's
Yeah.
all people in the church that are regular churchgoers that are not healed and aren't delivered. And they're mean. A lot of them can be mean as the devil, and you don't
Yeah.
see that side though, in the first couple of months of dating. That's why I always say it's wise to date a person as long as you can before you say, I'm going to get married to them, because you need that person under stress when things don't go their way. How do they treat you? And or if you have to say no to them, like a lot of those tend to push a person sexually, wanting to be sexual prior to getting married. And obviously that's a huge red flag. Now, again, if you're a compromised person, and there's a lot of Christians that are, then you're going to look the other way if that happens to you. It
Mm-hmm.
depends on how consecrated you are as a Christian. If you're a very strong, consecrated Christian, then you will tend to say, okay, that person's pushing me to be sexual before marriage. So therefore, huge red flag, ding, ding, ding. Maybe they're not the one,
Yeah.
and they're a Christian and they do all these Christian things and they're in their church. So I guess I just need to kind of, oh, that's just the flesh. Everybody's got flesh, and look the other way and then tolerate, give in, submit, and it can be devastating.
Yeah.
I always talk about this, Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 11, Ananias and Sapphira, husband
Mm.
and wife. And Ananias said to his wife Sapphira, when they were getting ready to donate some money for some property that they sold to Peter, to the church, basically, he said, hey, let's keep back some of this money and then tell him that this is the full amount. And so she went along with that. And probably because women, of course, back then needed to submit to their husbands. Most of the women didn't have a choice. They didn't work. So they couldn't live on their own. So she probably was like, okay, I guess we'll go ahead and do that. And then when he said that to Peter, Peter said, you just lied to the Holy Spirit. And then he died. And that was
Yeah.
after Jesus came on earth and ascended. So it was under the grace and New Testament teaching. So out pretty quickly at that point. Well, then when 3 hours later they came to ask the wife, so is this how much money that you got for it? She went ahead and lied too, probably because like, well, I got to go along with my husband. So she ends up dying because of that. And so
Yeah.
it's why it's so important that you get married to a person that is of like spirit, and has really gone through this process of healing and deliverance. Because if you don't, and you marry a person that says they're a Christian, but in reality they have so much flesh that it would be hard to have the Lord
Mm-hmm.
come on into heaven because you just said that you were a Christian, but you don't have any fruit of the Spirit, and that can have devastating effects, of course, on a person that marries them, because now it's like, gee, to save an argument, I just got to go along and give them their way. But in truth, then that can cause you to compromise your walk with the Lord. And that
It
can cause
can.
to sin essentially against the Lord. So,
Yeah, and you just said something interesting. You said to be with someone of like spirit, and I think in the church we're told to be equally yoked, which means of the same denomination or being a Christian like us, but it's more than just being a Christian. We have to be of like spirit, and that's quite key. Um, Moving from why this conversation matters to before we fall in love, what questions should someone ask themselves before they even start dating?
yeah. Well, I would recommend, and I do recommend, everyone, making sure that they ask themselves, am I healed of all my hurts and wounds from my life? Have I gone through any type of process where I've been delivered and I now walk in this fruit of the Spirit? Because if we as a person are still struggling with our flesh, again, there's uh, as far as like pornography, 57% of pastors look at pornography, 64% of youth pastors, 75% of men that attend church weekly, and a third of all women struggle with pornography. So if we're still struggling with that lustful spirit in our life, we need to make sure we get healed and delivered. Otherwise, it will draw us into these relationships with people who are oftentimes compromised sexually as well. And then the demonic spirits in both of us will then draw each other sexually together in an unhealthy, ungodly way. And then if you do end up falling in love and you fall in lust, basically, and you get married, and then oftentimes there is no intimacy or very little intimacy in the marriage because the person continues to struggle with what they've not gotten healed from after the marriage. A lot of people think, well, that'll just fix it. I'll have sexual relationships with my spouse. But in probably 95% of the case, that does not fix it because there's still legal rights. The person still is struggling with lust, and it will cause them to look other. That's another thing in dating. A telltale sign is if and it tends to be more the guy that's got the issue with the wandering eye. But if you're dating a person and then the guy that you're dating is looking at other women in your presence, especially, a woman that walks by that's attractive or a woman at the gym, and they're just because oftentimes they can't control that. They stop, they justify staying in that, and it's sin because the Lord said,
Mm-hmm.
and lusts after a woman in his heart, he's committed adultery with her. So there's a lot that they're just, well, that's just who men are. And I'm like, well, no, not the healthy ones that are delivered. They don't do that. They bounce their eyes, they guard their eyes, and so forth. So that,
You said something interesting. I had a really good friend in Berlin when I lived there who his family came from Bali, so he was quite burdened with the things he got into with Hindu worship when he was in his 20s. When I met him, he was in his 40s. He was like a big brother to me. But you said something interesting about if you, how did you put it? Something if you engage in too much or sexual activity, it affects the sex and the marriage. I don't have any stats on what I'm about to say. I'm sure a sex psychologist may be ready to shut me down. But from my experience with this friend, because in his 20s, along with probably the demons he was engaged with Hindu worship in Bali, he had a lot of sex in his 20s with women that by the time in his 40s, he couldn't, I don't know the right medical term, but get it up,
yeah,
and he was
yep,
so just defeated in that area in his life. And that taught me then, wow, when God says, don't engage in sexual immorality, i.e., premarital sex, there's a reason for that because it will affect the sexual relationship in a marriage.
yes, absolutely, yeah. So what will happen is, anyone that has sexual relationships with a lot of different people, they're going to have soul ties, number one, with those people, but they'll also have sexual covenants with each of them. So the demons that were in all those people will also have rights to then attach to that individual that's opened themselves up to that. And so, yeah, oftentimes what a person will see is if they ever do get married to a person and then they're committed to that one person, which oftentimes they're not committed to that one person because of the lust that they have. So it ruins the intimacy within the marriage. And then oftentimes, that can cause them struggle with sexual issues like that. Um, Same thing with pornography. If a person continues to look at pornography and they're masturbating, in fact, Derek Prince talked about this. He knew of many people that as they got older, oftentimes their fingers would start to bend backwards,
Mhm.
like permanently, and they could not, function with their
Mhm.
the way that they would normally
Thanks.
because of the masturbation, both women and men.
Mhm.
And so again, a lot of people are justifying, well, as long as I just do it with myself, that I'm not having sexual relationships, fornicating with other people. Well, in most all those cases, they're having thoughts, images of others. And then there's demons, of course, that can then come upon them, incubus, succubus, that would try to have sex with them. And they own that person and not allow them to be shared with their spouse. So that can also ruin marriages. And you could have a person that's sexually impure. Maybe it's the husband that's doing things he shouldn't be doing. And then those demons will then affect the wife in the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And then it
Yeah.
becomes defiled because of that. So, yeah.
Yeah. When God says don't touch a thing, there is a reason for it. And it's usually not because he doesn't want you to have a sex life. He created it. It's
Yeah.
just because there are spiritual ramifications for engaging in things that are sin.
Yes.
Okay, this is the part I'm excited to chat with you about. So the questions that every couple should ask when it comes to faith, what are some questions that you should be asking someone you're dating?
Yeah. So what I would recommend, most people will generically say, well, are you Christian? Where do you go to church at? Some people will say, okay, do you have the gift of the Holy Spirit? Do you have tongues? Do you pray in tongues? And even then, I know of people that can pray in the Spirit, pray in tongues, and they still have demons because of unforgiveness. Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35, Jesus was pretty uh, uh, explanative, I guess, when he talked about the parable of the unforgiving servant who was forgiven for billions of dollars and turned around and not forgive a guy that owed him a little bit. And then because he says, if we don't forgive from our hearts, we'll be turned over to the tormentors, which are demons. But we have to forgive from our hearts. And so most people don't do that. They don't forgive from their hearts. So you can ask the generic questions, that most people ask. What I would recommend is, because it's imperative, have you gone through any type of soul wound healing? Have you gotten, your inner emotions healed from the hurts and wounds that you've gone through in your life? Have that dialogue. And if the person just randomly quickly says, "Oh yeah, I got them healed," then I'd say, how? How did you get those healed? And if they hem and haw about it and they don't have any details of how it actually happened, oftentimes they'll just lie and make up something. But then at that
Mm-hmm.
point, you know that, okay, they've probably not gone through any type of inner healing, soul wound healing at all, which is a huge red flag. And then you could also mention and add in, have you gone through deliverance from the spirits? And then if they flip out and, I don't have any demons, I'm a Christian. You're like, hmm. So, I mean, obviously that's an important question to ask early in the relationship, because if you don't, and you're just simply, oh, let's go out and have fun and do all these dates and oftentimes end with sexually energized, kissing and other things that happen that can go way beyond. Well, then at that point, now you're exchanging, soul ties and sexual covenants on top of it, which makes it much more cloudy and harder to pull away from the person, because then now I've got a good feeling it's attached to it. So I would advise everyone to have the conversation. And even ask them, what kind of hurts and wounds did you have when you were growing up? How'd your father treat you? How'd your mother treat you? Have those frank conversations. And if the person's hesitant, they don't want to talk about it, well, that's a red flag, because now it's like, I don't even know what I'm dealing with, you know. It- And again, most people think, well, if they've been hurt and wounded, I'm just going to love them through all that. I'm just going to love them and love them. And it's like, yeah, well, you can't love the demons out of them and have rights to stay there. And you may not see the demonic side of them until you get married. And then on the honeymoon, the demons come out. And then you're like, uh-oh, where did this personality come from? Never saw this before. Then it's great. So I would always have the conversation with, okay, well, what were your hurts? What were your wounds? And if they were going to be frank and honest with it, well, that's a good thing. And then, okay, what kind of process did you go through to get those wounds healed? And if they don't know, well, I just forgave. Okay, how did you forgive? Oh, I just said it. Oh, and how did you feel afterwards? Because oftentimes a person that's not been healed and or delivered will keep talking about the hurts and the wounds as they go through the relationship with other people. Well, yeah, they did
Mhm.
this, that, they did this, and they just keep on talking about it. And if a person keeps talking about it on a regular basis, they've not gotten the wounds healed. They probably have unforgiveness, and there's going to be demonic spirits attached to their soul that are hiding within them until they can try to get you to say, I do. And then you have the wedding. And then again, it could happen in the first week, could happen in the first month. All of a sudden, you're like, "Oh, man, they did not get their wounds healed. They did not get
It's
delivered."
gonna come out. It's gonna come
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah,
If you're having this discussion and they say, "Oh, well, what's healing of soul wounds? What are soul ties?" But if they don't know what it is, because there's a lot of Christians who don't know this kind of talk, but if
yeah,
they're open to it,
yeah.
would you advise to still stay in the relationship if they're open to
Sure,
pursuing?
sure, yeah,
Okay.
they're open to it. That's the thing is now understanding that there'll be some that might say one thing and then their actions are another. So they might say, "Oh, yeah," because they feel like they're in love with them or could be in lust with them. So they're gonna do anything they can to try to say, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." But when the rubber hits the road, if they actually do set up a inner healing session with someone and or deliverance, and then they keep cutting it and canceling it, and they don't go through with that, then that's a huge red flag. Okay, why? Why are you not going through this? Of course, their demonic spirits in them will try to cause them to not go through that so they don't get delivered from it. But if the person's genuine about it, I never heard of this before. And they start doing some research and they're like, wow, now I understand that. Yeah, it's important to get. Well, then, yeah, great. Now you can both get healed and set free before you say I do. And then it's not too late. So, yeah.
Yeah. Are there questions about character that one should be asking?
Well, sure. Uh, have you ever been arrested? Do you struggle with various addictions? You know,
Things like that.
could be, drug issues, alcohol issues, food, could be food issues. And that can be a hard discussion to have with somebody, but there's, you know, well, do you have to eat all these? Do you have to drink this specific items all the time? So that's why over time, the character will oftentimes be shown, when the person's under stress and, in the dating process, how do they behave? Do they cuss? I knew a woman that did not cuss until she got married, and then all of a sudden she started saying the F word. I'm like, where was that at? It's like, oh, I'm like, that's not good. And
Yeah.
so, are there some blatant things? But again, over time, it oftentimes reveals that. Again, if they don't get their way, how do they treat? Like if they really want to do something, and you're like, nah, I'm really not feeling it, or I'm not feeling led to do that, and they get really mad at you, then okay, now I'm starting to see things in the character that aren't good. Because everybody's going to put forward their best face, their best mask initially, um, try to, but that's
Yeah.
why it's important to go through this over time. You know, um, obviously, if they have a pattern of other people in their life that maybe they have manifested on, again, oftentimes they're not going to reveal that information. They'll act like they're victims. They'll lie basically. So you need to look out for, are there any times when they're lying to you about things?
Mhm.
Again, I always say there's a proper order too. The man should be pursuing the woman, and where women pursue the man, and the women will typically have the spirit of Jezebel to do that. So, and then they'll try to act like they were a victim in these other relationships that were broken, when in reality, no, it was because of them. They just don't want to admit the truth. And of course, there can be guys that are narcissistic and Jezebelic too, because what will happen is, again, they're controlling, they're manipulative, demanding, and they end up getting relationships, and then the person pulls away from them normally, and then they
Yeah.
feel rejected, and then they come up with a false narrative to tell everybody, and everybody that doesn't know they don't talk to the other person will tend to believe them. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Got it. Questions on family, emotional health that one should be asking?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a good question to ask, what does your father, what's his job? What does he do? What does your mom do? Do they go to church? How are your siblings? Because again, if a mom and a dad have hurt and wounded the person that you're looking to date, and if they have siblings, those siblings will typically have gone through similar hurts and wounds that that person you're considering dating is. So if there's a lot of brokenness, toxicness within that family, then you can pretty much guarantee that person's got the same hurts and those same wounds, and they're going to have demonic spirits because of that too. So if they've
Sure.
never gone through that process, then and there can be families that look and appear to be great because they might have been successful financially, and they might go to church all the time, but they could have very religious spirits, and they could be very um, toxic, being more like a Pharisee and a scribe. So you might get fooled by the facade of, wow, look at this beautiful house that they have. They must be great. Oh, they go to church all the time. Ah, they're just great. And you don't see the controlling side of the family because they put forth their best effort. So oftentimes it's like you need to listen to the Lord and the Holy Spirit to tell you the truth about a person. Don't look upon what you see, because the Lord looks upon the heart. So we need to ask the Lord to show that person's heart to us. And
Yeah,
that's why it's good to do this over time. And when there's stress on that person, how do they behave? Do they blow up? Do they get really mad and angry? Because if they do, that's a huge, huge red flag. So.
for sure. Any questions on purpose that we should be asking?
Well, I mean, people have to understand that, the purpose of marriage is, um, to procreate. The Lord wants to have godly offspring. It talks about in Malachi chapter 2. Um, and, and again, in Malachi chapter 2, people will talk about how God hates divorce, but it's addressing how men were treating the wives, that God was angry with the men dealing treacherously with the wife of their youth. 3 talks about that, which leads to violence and, of course, divorce. And of course, the men back then were divorcing for really no reason whatsoever, didn't have a right to. So it's important to understand that the purpose of our marriage is to procreate, to have godly children, and of course, treating one another where we both submit to the Lord, we both submit to one another, that one doesn't lord over them the other. Because I know a lot of men that are misogynistic. They're like, you got to, go along with whatever I say and be a king dictator. And it's like, no, that was not the idea of what a marriage should be like. And it's important to recognize that we are to be on the same team. And you can be if you're both healed and you're both delivered. And then your purpose is going to be more kingdom purposes. What can we do together to love one another and to love other people? And to not just have, well, I'm going to have you serve me and be my servant. And whatever I want, I'm going to get. And if you don't, I'm going to get mad and treat you emotionally abusive. That's not at all the purpose of marriage, of course. So.
Yeah, of course. Quickly touching on, most people forget to ask, what are conversations couples tend to avoid?
Yeah, oftentimes they're going to avoid questions like, do you struggle with sexual impurity and lust?
Mm, mm,
Most people don't want to ask that question. I'm like, well, it's important. But you understand if somebody asks that to somebody who's struggling with it, they will oftentimes lie, oh, no, I'm good. I mean, I hear it all the time from couples that I do sessions with. Yeah, he told me he's a Christian, but I did not know that he struggled with pornography till after we got married. So, um, other questions would be, how did you get those wounds healed from your childhood years? How did you get delivered from the demonic strongholds? Most people aren't going to ask those questions, but
mhm.
it's very important that they do.
I think I had another cousin who once said, you've got to ask certain questions early on in the first few dates, because as we progress in a relationship, couples don't talk because you start to get scared. If I ask certain things, I'm going to run him off, run her off.
Yep. Yep.
But so that's why in the first few dates we tend to be a little bit more confident in
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I agree
And
with that.
yeah, and oftentimes you'll see a person that is more narcissistic or Jezebel will try to play the part of who they think that you want them to be in
Mm,
order to get you to fall in love with them. So they're professional great actors and actresses. And so they'll get to know what your likes are and or dislikes, and they'll make sure that they perform that way on the initial several dates. It's like, oh, you say you like, I don't know, to watch baseball. Then guess what? I love to watch baseball too. And they'll, in
mm,
reality, in their heart, they hate baseball. It's boring, and they never want to ever watch the game. So then, or they'll say, oh, you like to go for a hike? Well, I love to go for a hike. I love to exercise. And then as time goes
mm.
forward, they're like, no, but I'm not feeling it. Nope, I'm not. And they were just trying longer with them. So,
Right. How can we ask these questions without making it sound like an interview,
well,
like an interrogation? Just ask.
yeah, I would just say, listen, I want to make sure, that I know, more of who you really are, who your heart is, and so forth, to see if we're compatible, and then just say I've got some questions that I ask everyone that I am considering to date, so that way they know it's not just them, but it's and say it's wisdom, because it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree that when I was living in Lebanon, there was a guy I dated at church and he had a big pornography issue and the relationship ended amongst other things. But there was another guy in the church who was steadily, strongly pursuing me. And I knew his testimony, that he had once been gay and then found Jesus and turned his life around. And I said to him during COVID, I said, listen, I want to have a chat with you. I can discern, I can feel, I can tell you're pursuing me, but I need to ask you some questions. And don't take this as if, oh, I'm interested. These are just questions. And I said to him, um, are you still attracted to men? I think that's a fair question. His answer wasn't quite confident enough for me to even
Mm,
consider dating. But then I also said, do you have a pornography? Do you look at pornography? And my 20-year-old self would have never had the confidence to ask a guy. And his response was, yes, I do look at pornography, but I know in marriage it's going to stop because I'm going
uh,
to be married. And I'm like, oh, do you think I was born yesterday? Like, if anything, marriage is probably going to make
mm,
it worse.
yeah, yeah,
um, and so that having the confidence to ask questions will save a whole lot of heartache. I
yes,
think then, getting into a thing, it's easy to get in, but hard to get out of things.
yeah,
So,
uh, yep,
yeah, we have to have that confidence.
yeah,
Okay, a couple of last questions. What are some green flags in your opinion? Like what qualities consistently lead to a healthy marriage?
yeah,
Um, that
yes.
you
Green flags would be that they can talk about how the Lord speaks to them,
Mm,
how they hear from the Lord. The Lord told me about this. The Lord, and now again, everybody can lie, and those that are very high level Jezebels can lie and make these things up. So that's why you got to pray, hear from the Lord, have discernment, let the Holy Spirit confirm. But if they are genuinely hearing from the Lord told me this, or Lord guided me here, that's important. That's a green flag. Obviously, if they obey what the Lord says, like I just said, well, hey, I was going to do this, but the Lord cautioned me, or the Holy Spirit cautioned me, so I obeyed the Lord and said, nope, I'm not going to do that. So that's a green flag. If they volunteer to tell you, can I share with you some of the struggles that I have in my life? Most people will never do that. Of course, those who are Jezebelic will never tell you about and be honest with struggles that they have.
mhm.
But the person's like, I want to share with you some of the things I struggle with, and they're going to be honest with you on that. That's a huge green flag. Um, what are the green flags? Of course, they're honest. You're not catching
Yeah.
them in lies. Oftentimes people that are off, not the way they should be, will lie even about insignificant things. So that's why you date the person, then you start to see, wait a minute, they just said that they went here. I know that they didn't. Why did they do that? That's a lie, so how
Mm-hmm.
long, if they walk pretty consistently in the fruit of the Spirit, so that's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. And then the Holy Spirit just reminded me of this. I forgot about this. How they treat people who serve them. So if they're eating at a restaurant and they're being rude, dismissive, mocking, making fun of the person that's serving them, that's a huge indicator that they're not right, because now they're talking down to. So if they're being very loving and gentle and kind with those who are serving them, whether it be in food, restaurants, or anywhere else, that's a huge green flag. If they have proper sexual boundaries, so they're not pushing, saying, "Hey, let's fool around, let's do things that that are not good." If they open the door consistently and they respect, again, if it's a guy opening the door, the car door, and the doors for the woman, so a lot of those things people they don't do anymore, or they might do them initially, and then they start to fall off as time gets older. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
Okay, so I want to ask you to kind of wrap up this chat with a question about marriage. And then after that, I want to just do a fun, quick rapid fire of a few questions. So we started off the conversation talking about why asking key questions is important. Can you kind of parlay and wrap up talking about how God created marriage? This was not a human made institution. Marriage is to have future progeny that are holy, that are, seeking to follow the Lord. So, in asking key questions and wrapping that up with God's purpose for marriage, we're trying to lessen divorces. If you kind of understand what I'm saying, just wrapping this topic up on the holiness and key reason
yeah,
for marriage.
yeah. I mean, the reason for marriage is that we are to love one another like Christ would want a symbol of how he loved us, which can cause us to have to lay our life down and cause us to sacrifice. But ultimately, the Lord wants us to be healed of the hurts and the wounds that we had, so that we can love one another like Christ. We can both submit to the Lord. We can both hear from the Lord. We can then help other people to get healed, set free, delivered. We can then, of course, have children and have them raised in a secure environment where they feel loved and cherished and not treated poorly. So there's a lot of marriages that obviously are hurt and damaged and are not at all the way that they should be. What's interesting is you can find some marriages where they're doing great, and they're not even Christians. And I always wondered about that. I'm like, Lord, why are there some people that have been married for years and years and years, and they don't have any like major strife and stuff? And he said, well, because they do truly love one another, even though they might not have a strong commitment to Christ. I'm like, well, there's a lot of people that are Christians that go to church all the time, and they're not that way behind closed doors. They have a person that's very mean. And the Lord's like, yeah, it's because they had hurts, wounds they never got healed from, and they got demonic stuff going on. And so they don't love their spouse. They might do it in front of the church and try to play act like they do, but behind closed doors, they've got demonic spirits that hate their spouse and are. I know of a guy, sadly, that he was at my church with his wife and their children, and she ended up getting a brain tumor in her late 40s. She died from it at age 49, and he would
Mm.
bring her in, roll her in on her wheelchair and dote on her, and everybody thought, "Oh, this is so sad." We all prayed for her to get healed. Never got healed. And then after she passed away, I finally got to talk to one of their children, he was like 13 years old. He told me that, well, my dad's not this way behind closed doors. He's very mean to my mom. He was very mean to my brothers and sisters. And as soon as they graduated, they left home. And I don't want to be around my dad anymore because he's mean. And I'm like, oh my Lord. I go, because he talks so loving and kind. And then I come to find out that his trauma that he had was he was sexually molested by his own father. And that's where he got the demons at, even though he went to church, called himself a Christian and so forth. But he was not healed of those wounds.
Yeah.
So it's so important to get both husband and wives healed of these wounds, get delivered, and then they can love each other like Christ, the way that the Lord intended. Yeah.
Yeah. It's beautiful when we get freedom from soul wounds. Um, it's very freeing and it's a beautiful thing. It's just getting there and having that knowledge that's kind of sometimes the hardest part. Okay, quick rapid fire.
Okay.
Uh, Better question than what's your love language to ask a
Your question
partner.
in love language? Yeah. I'd say, have you been healed of your hurts and wounds and delivered? That would be the best question.
Yeah. Biggest dating myth.
Biggest dating myth. I guess I would just where a lot of people go awry is they will look physically, gee, I'm attracted, and then they throw out the window everything else of who that person really is. Because there's a
Yeah.
lot of very attractive people that are very Jezebelic and narcissistic because they've been used to getting their way because of the attractiveness. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
agree. Most underrated quality in a spouse.
Most underrated quality is, I would say, you know, again, there's 9 fruits of the spirit. 2 of the hardest ones to walk in are long suffering, patience, and self control. So when a person has walked out some long suffering, which could be they're in the marriage and or whatever process of other relationships, and they've been hurt and wounded, and they're still loving that person like Christ. That can be really hard for a person. And then self control, where
Yeah.
you're like, okay, I'm not gonna whatever look at pornography, masturbate. I'm going to control that. I'm not going to eat foods that are horrible for me. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to starve my flesh in a healthy way. So I'd say those would be.
Okay. I think I know the answer to this question. One book every dating couple should read.
I would say my book, Freedom from Soul Wounds and Demons.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's been in the top 10 of Christian marriages for over a year now on Amazon, and and I'm getting ready to actually write a new book that's going to be specifically related to marriage and divorce and remarriage. So I'm hoping to have that book done by the I don't know, end of the year, I guess would be my goal. But because there's a lot of misnomers out there in the church, and the
Yeah.
Lord doesn't want us to put forever stay in an emotionally abusive marriage where we're getting because it causes an early death. It really does. Just people that struggle. That's why it's like get healed, get delivered, and then you don't have to go through the divorce because then now you got 2
That's
people
true.
to help. So yeah.
That's true. I would flash up the book because I've got a copy. I read it and it was a blessing to me. And we did a session together. But my mom's upstairs reading the book now. Literally, she's reading the book, so I
Wow.
don't have it
Awesome.
to
Awesome.
flash up. The
Okay.
two
Good.
last questions. One conversation couples should have before engagement. I think it's what we've been talking about.
Yeah. I mean, should have the discussion surrounding, okay, what were your hurts and your wounds, and then how did you get healed from them? How did
Yeah.
you go through that process, and how did you get delivered? Because most people have not. And if
Yeah.
they're looking at you like you got 10 heads, then they obviously don't know what you're talking about. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Last one. Best marriage advice you ever received.
I guess the best marriage advice is to take your time in the dating process.
Mm,
Don't, if a person's pressuring you to get married earlier than what you feels comfortable with, then don't, wait. Because the longer that you can wait, the longer that you can see who they might really be behind closed doors, because the demons, again, I know a lot of people, the demons and the people will try to behave in a way that they can stay in the game. And then once they get married, then they're like, okay, now I can get rid of this mask of being loving and kind, and now I can treat you like controlling, manipulative, and you got to be my servant now. And it's just like, oh man, where was that at before the
Yeah.
wedding? So, yep.
And these marriages aren't lasting. I feel like Gen Zs, and the younger you are, people have very low tolerance rates. So people are even making it less than a year these days.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nelson. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope it's a blessing to others.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast episode and that you have found a soulful connection to the conversation. God bless you, and until the next episode, go bless somebody else.